Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Ashley. I'm the policy advisor for Nesta, and today we're going to be discussing our forthcoming policy plan for clean heat in Scotland. For those of you who maybe aren't aware of Nesta, we are the UK's innovation agency for social good. We exist to create innovative solutions to some of our biggest societal challenges, and we tackle these through combating our three main missions. One of which is our Sustainable Future mission, which is the reason that we are all here today. I'm going to do a quick intro just now, and then I'll be handing over to Robin Parker, our mission manager for Sustainable Future in Scotland, who will walk you through a little sneak preview of the presentation. And this will be followed by a panel discussion with some experts from across the sector. Of course, we will have a live Q&A during this, so please do submit questions, comments as we go. So a quick intro into our Sustainable Future mission. Our Sustainable Future mission focuses on decarbonising home heating, moving us away from polluting heating sources onto clean heating systems that are better for people and for the planet. We focus on this because the gas boilers and oil heating that most of us use to keep our homes warm are currently responsible for around about an eighth of Scotland's total carbon emissions. Fundamentally, that's incompatible with our carbon targets, and we need to change that. We also work on home decarbonisation because we know that this move away to clean heating is going to be deeply personal. This consists of going into our homes where we stay warm, where we live our lives, and making fundamental changes to our environment and the place that we feel safe. It's important that we need to make this change well, and we need to do it justly. Finally, we work on this at Nesta because it's hard. These are complex social and economic and systemic drivers that have brought us to being reliant on gas and oil heating for comfort and safety. The move away from this must deal with those head on, and we feel up to the challenge. Because of all of this, we think that home heating should be a key topic in the run-up to the next Scottish election in 2026, which is why we wanted to bring this event together. We need more opportunities to talk about how we in Scotland change our heating systems. It's good to talk. I'm going to hand over now to Robin, who's going to present some slides that provide a sneak preview of the policy plan for clean heat, which we will publish soon. I've got a little cue here to make a joke at Robin's expense to get on with it. So Robin, get on with it. And then we'll go over to the panel. Just quick things in terms of housekeeping. If there's any tech issues, we have wonderful colleagues behind the scenes who'll get us all back up and running. So yeah, Robin, over to you.
Well, hello everyone, and really great that you could join us. I guess my job is to do a bit of context and scene setting and give you all a bit of a sneak preview of the policy plan for clean heating that Ashley was telling you about and that we've been working on. Decarbonising home heating is definitely it's a complex, it's a long-term initiative, and it's something that therefore is going to require a comprehensive and long-term strategy. And so our idea behind this policy plan is to bring something together. We wanted to create a report that attempts to bring all that complexity in one place and kind of sets out what we think the to-do list is for both Scottish and UK governments, because again, this is a topic that cuts across devolved and reserved areas. So actually, I guess set out the reason that we work at Nesta on home heating is because of climate change. But I wanted to start my sort of presentation, my scene setting, by setting out why I think we'd want to work on this, why we want to do this in Scotland, even if climate change wasn't a thing. So Hannah, if you take me to the next slide. My reason for why we should do this, why we should want to do this anyway, is I think where we've got to with renewable electricity in Scotland, we are generating record amounts of clean renewable electricity. In 2022, it was already more than 1.5 times the amount of electricity that we used. It's up to 38 terawatt hours in 2024 that we generated. We've been producing so much renewable electricity that we export significant amounts of it down to England and to our other neighbours, and we could be sending even more if the transmission capacity was there. And that's kind of just till now. And then you look over at the pipeline of what we're building, what we're going to be building in terms of renewable electricity generation capacity over the next while. As of March 2025, there was another 70 gigawatts in the planning pipeline in Scotland. And the CCC has modelled Scotland's renewable electricity generation tripling from where it was in 2023 by 2035. It's not quite as simple as this, but we are heading well towards having more renewable electricity than we know what to do with. So why wouldn't we use it for something as important as heating our homes, especially when we've got the technology to do it? And I guess I kind of wanted to take with this slide, partly show you the new heat pump that we've just had installed in our house, but also talk you through this kind of more down at the household scale. So what you see here in my argument is a smart, comfortable and flexible energy system. This system knows the temperature outside the house and the temperature inside the house, and it can therefore work out if it needs to be putting lots and lots of heat into the house with warm radiators, or if it only needs to drop a teeny bit of heat into the home because it's warm outside. So that means it's goodbye to those kind of big hot air blasts that you get from a dumb gas boiler. The house is just comfortable all day. And then in the middle, that is a 200-litre hot water tank. But my argument is it's also a huge heat battery. Lithium is a great storage medium for energy, but so is water, and we've got lots of that in Scotland. So in that hot water cylinder and across homes across Scotland, we'll have lots of storage and lots of flexibility that can provide, just as much as the electric vehicles on people's driveways are able to provide flexibility to the electricity system. So if the signals are in place from electricity tariffs, you can shift heat demand, you can shift hot water cycles. And already through research we've done at Nesta, we found that time of use tariffs could save households 15%, and by flexing demand, you can save even more. So I guess my kind of argument is that when we've got so much renewable electricity in Scotland, why would we, when we are now in a position in the UK where we are importing gas, why would we, we're a net importer of gas in the UK, why would we rely on those imports when we could be using cheap, homegrown, low-cost renewable electricity and using that renewable electricity to heat our homes? So if you take me to the next slide, Hannah, I kind of just want to take it back to climate terms as part of the scene setting, and make the case that the next big series of changes that are going to happen in the next decade, where's that coming from? It's coming from reductions in carbon emissions from heat and transport. So the CCC in their recent advice to the Scottish Government set out that about half of all the emission reductions in the next decade come just from heat and transport, and that's primarily almost entirely from electrification. So the next decade is the decade of electrification of heat and transport when it comes to us in Scotland. So on the next slide, what I've got is I've given you the vision. We should talk about where we are today. Well, the good news is that we already have a bunch of heat pumps providing heating day in, day out to homes. It's not a new technology. There are already thousands of homes living with heat pumps, and the vast majority of them are satisfied and happy with the warmth that they receive. They're most prevalent in rural areas. In the Western Isles, 1 in 12 homes has a heat pump. That's the kind of the highest density anywhere in the UK, and it's similar on Orkney. And that's simply reflects that when gas isn't an option, many of these are off gas grid homes. The household economics and the experience of dealing with heating or oil orders, that's a bit rubbish. So the kind of case for moving to electrified heat is that much stronger. And I guess the other thing to say about heat pumps in Scotland is that they come small. They're air-to-air heat pumps that are small enough for a hotel room, and then they come giant as well. So there's a heat pump through in Clydebank that's big enough to heat thousands of homes through a heat network. Some of the heat pumps in Scotland will be Mitsubishi Ecodans that are made here in Scotland, in Livingston. Some of them are giant heat pumps, like I said, made by Star Renewables in Glasgow. Some of them will be Kenza heat pumps sitting in someone's cupboard using the ambient heat from a borehole, and those heat pumps are made in Cornwall. And then there's a bunch of other companies, Octopus, Ideal and Valent, also make or have plans to make heat pumps elsewhere in the UK. But the problem is we've been going slow so far. So 5 years ago, the CCC set out a pathway for heat pump installations in Scotland, and we're not on course to meet it. So the grey line is the challenge the CCC set us 5 years ago, and the blue line is the steady increase in heat pump numbers that we've actually achieved. So that's the past 5 years. And on the next slide, I've got kind of what the future holds for us. So in 2024, we had just over 7,500 heat pumps installed in existing homes in Scotland. That's according to the MCS database. And the CCC, with their recent advice to the Scottish Government, have said, okay, that's where you are, but here's a new pathway, here's a new challenge for what you need to do to get clean heating into many more homes in Scotland. I mean, I'd say this is also in some ways it's a cautious, conservative, pragmatic pathway. It's one that starts from where we are today, and it kind of appreciates that kind of there is still the ramping up that needs to happen in the installation industry, but still the CCC's pathway gets us to a 5-fold increase in heat pump installations in 2030, and then very rapid growth through the early 2030s, so that by 2035 there are no new gas boiler replacements, and heat pumps are installed at about 120,000 per year in Scotland, equivalent to numbers of gas boilers reaching the end of their serviceable life. So no new gas boilers, just heat pumps and other clean heating from 2035 onwards. You'll also see in here that heat networks and communal heating systems have a significant role to play here in Scotland, as do other electric heating systems. There will be those heat networks and communal systems will be particularly important in flats and tenements, and we have a lot of those in Scotland. So in 2030, those heat network communal heating systems are providing about 1 in 3 of the replacement heating systems, which is a really big difference from today. Heat networks are being built for new homes, but there are very few heat networks and communal heating systems that are going into existing homes. We're starting from a very low base with that as well. We do also need energy efficiency measures. In the CCC's pathway, they provide around 15% of reductions in home heating by 2035. And that's especially the smaller low-cost measures like draft proofing and finding the remaining lofts that don't have loft insulation, and a fewer number of the kind of the big, more invasive, more expensive energy efficiency measures. So looking at the next slide and thinking ahead to the election, I've given you a bit already what I kind of think the sort of like the political narrative should look like. This is what I think the sort of the big picture in terms of delivery needs to look like. And there's a sort of essentially 4 big tasks. One of them is to make up for lost time. We've been going too slow in terms of ramping up clean heating. We've been putting off our homework and procrastinating, and now we need to get on with it. The second task is that we need to ramp up through the early part of the next parliament, building up an installation industry steadily so that it's ready to deliver, and then ready to deliver on that huge acceleration that needs to happen in the early 2030s at the latest. So the other task for policymakers is to have the policy in place ready to support that huge acceleration. And then we need to start signalling that, kind of looking longer term, that we will get to a place in the 2040s where only a very few of us are still using fossil fuel heating at that point. So the kind of the signalling, the planning and preparation for that's really important too. So the message there for our clean heat policymakers in UK and Scottish Government is that we need to be busy over the next few years. I guess the other way in our policy plan that we're planning to sort of bring together things is in what we're calling 5 strategic elements. So kind of 5 objectives, 5 outcomes that policymakers also need to achieve. So clean heating needs to be made more affordable. We need to have in place structures and systems that are ready to deliver clean heat at bigger scale and pace. We think alongside a kind of an individual approach, there needs to be collective, community-based ways of shifting to clean heating too. As I was just saying, we need to have steps in place ready to deliver the phase out of fossil fuel heating. And then the 2 building blocks that kind of underpin all of this are on the householder side. So providing more support to households and to consumers, making it easier for them to switch to clean heating and smoother. And then secondly, supporting Scotland's workforce and the heating industry so that it's ready, it's prepared to deliver on a mass market for clean heating when that is here in Scotland. So diving into each of those a bit more, and starting with making clean heat more affordable. So these are kind of this is going to be a rough, quick whirlwind through some of the policy asks that we have here at Nesta, and the plan is to then dive into these a bit more with the discussion panel that we have coming up. So starting with what we need to do to make clean heat more affordable. I guess there's 2 challenges here. So the kind of the overall challenge is to make the lifetime costs of heat pumps comparable, competitive with gas boilers, and we are at about that point at the moment. they are roughly comparable between getting a replacement gas boiler or getting a heat pump. But that's usually reliant at the moment on a big subsidy, £7,500 through Home Energy Scotland, to support the upfront costs of getting a heat pump. And so that works now, and that's helping to increase the number of people getting heat pumps at the moment. But in the medium term, that's not sustainable in terms of the numbers of grants that we would have to give out in the 2030s and the amount of money that that would cost overall the public sector. So particularly when it's really important that we keep aside upfront cost support for people on lower incomes who are living in fuel poverty or who live in social housing. And at the moment, we have programs through Warmer Home Scotland and other programs such as the Net Zero Heat Fund that provide that kind of grant to those in fuel poverty and social housing. So we need a medium term, we need a longer term plan for where the kind of drive and who starts picking up the costs of some of the upfront costs more, and where this was we had a proposal from the Scottish Government in the Heat and Buildings Bill consultation over a year and a half ago now, for requiring those people buying homes to pick up some of the costs themselves through something called the point of purchase, so a requirement on people buying homes to fit clean heating within the period afterwards to do that. Research by Nesta and Changeworks has shown that if you design that with strong mitigations, the point of purchase requirement would have been a viable and valuable tool to grow clean heating. And so, similar to the CCC, kind of what I would say on this is, well, if it's not going to be the point of purchase requirement, that's something to start taking away this kind of reliance on subsidy that we have for growing the clean heat market. What is it? What's the alternative? And then the other big thing that needs to happen to make clean heat affordable is over on the running cost side of things. And this is where it belongs to the UK government. So taking us on to the next slide, at the moment, electricity costs much more than gas. It costs 4 times what gas costs. And the amazing thing with heat pumps is because they are so efficient, they're 3 to 4 times more efficient than a gas boiler. That means that they can catch up with that electricity to gas price ratio. But we need something to make electricity cheaper in the long run. Nesta's view is the quickest and fastest way there is to make changes to the levy system. So we pay for a lot of social goods through our electricity bills, but not through our gas bills. And those are things that in other countries would be paid for through general taxation. And so those things should be much more balanced in how they're spread across our energy bills. And that's something my colleague Marcus can speak much more to when we get to the discussion part of today. Moving to the kind of the scale point I made, there's a whole raft of things that need to happen so that switching to clean heating at scale can happen. That could mean many things. It could mean a heat network for part of a city centre. It could mean a collective purchasing scheme where lots of people are offered the opportunity to switch to a heat pump, and there's kind of economies of scale that arise from that. And there's a whole raft of things that need to happen there, most notably from the heat network side of things, in the Heat and Buildings Bill, a requirement for public sector and commercial buildings potentially to connect to a heat network and give those people building heat networks some confidence that they know where some of their income, some of their heat buyers will come from. I won't go in lots to sort of what needs to happen in preparation for fossil fuel heating systems being phased out, but this is kind of from my point of view about making sure that we have planning in place now for a time when there is very low usership in the 2040s for the gas grid. Lots of this is on the UK government for how they set about the gas grid. It's also on the UK government to deliver something called the Clean Heat Market Mechanism, which sets a requirement on people manufacturing gas boilers to also manufacture heat pumps and sell increasingly large numbers of them. But yeah, the most important thing here is about the kind of the signalling and the long-term planning that goes in place here. Thinking about consumers, there's lots of things to do to support consumers. For those in the private rented sector, it means having in place minimum energy efficiency standards so that we're protecting tenants from wasting money heating inefficient homes in the private rented sector. They tend to be more inefficient than other homes on the whole, particularly in comparison to socially rented homes, which have had minimum energy standards for a long time now. There's also a lot that needs to happen in the Home Energy Scotland scheme to keep making it smoother, keep making it easier to navigate. The Home Energy Scotland, it's something we should be proud of. It provides a really good grant. It provides an interest-free loan as well, but it needs to be something that works for both consumers, that doesn't put in place unnecessary roadblocks. It's a smoother system that people can get through quickly. And crucially, it also needs to work for people in the supply chain. So we need to have people in the supply chain, installers out there marketing that scheme, making the case for it. But yeah, one of the great things with the Home Energy Scotland scheme is that it also points people towards the fuel poverty schemes when they're eligible for those, Warm Home Scotland, Eco and so on. It points people towards those and makes sure they get that kind of financial support if they're eligible for it. But it does need to be made smoother and kind of easier consumer journey. We should look at whether there's unnecessary things in that process that can be removed. And then lastly, to my last slide, last couple of slides, I'm going to talk a bit about what needs to happen in the supply chain side of things. So there's kind of a few different challenges here, to my mind. One of them is about supporting the existing workforce. So we have a plumbing and heating workforce who are providing heating, servicing heating systems across Scotland. They're the experts in doing that, and they need to be supported with the transition to servicing, installing, providing heating systems that are renewable and based around heat pumps, based around electric heating. So one task is to support that workforce with the transition. The next task is that it's an aging workforce, and we need to do a lot more plumbing and heating stuff in the next 5 to 10 years than we have done in the last 5 to 10 years. So we also need to be looking at how we increase the numbers in that workforce. So bringing through young people, bringing through people who are changing career. I guess just lastly, I want to talk a little bit about a project we ran jointly with SNPF, and you'll hear from Scott from SNPF in a moment too. So we ran a project where we gave people in the gas boiler industry, installers in the plumbing and heating industry, we gave them a heat pump to install in their own home. And we found that was something that really started them off on that transition, started them off and put them in a place where they were a lot more confident in electric heating as kind of being the future, and being kind of where the industry was headed, and kind of understanding the benefits and understanding how it worked in their own home. We've now got to a point where we're scaling that model. So there's a website, startathome.org.uk, where we have some schemes who are already offering that model to people in the existing plumbing and heating workforce. And we'd love to have other organizations, other people providing those kind of heat pump at home to people in the plumbing and heating industry, because we think it's a really good way to support people with the transition. I guess just lastly, putting this slide up, not to wonder about whether Nelson Mandela would have been into heat pumps, but I think this quote is super relevant to the climate transition in Scotland. In the noughties, there would have been people saying that we could never manage solely on clean electricity in Scotland, and we're very, very nearly done with that. And the UK will be nearly done with it too if the UK government delivers on its clean power mission. Similarly, just 10 years ago, the idea that electric vehicles would be a big thing, plenty of people would have told you that would never happen, would have told you it's impossible. And it is happening. There's a flood of electric vehicles in the new market, and they're starting to flow through into the second-hand market as well. And so my kind of leaving point to leave you on is that the takeoff in clean heat might look difficult, but once we've done it and we look back on it, we will ask why we didn't do it sooner. So yeah, big thank you, and yeah, let's get into some discussion and bring in the rest of our panel. So back to you, Ashley.
Thank you so much for that, Robin. That was great. So yeah, now we're going to move on to the panel discussion segment of today. If you have questions, please do pop them in the chat. If you're watching on YouTube and LinkedIn, you can comment below, and we have a little system where we'll star them and we'll get through them. I'll do a quick round robin of introductions for our panel members here. So joining us today, we have Gillian Campbell, who's the director of the Existing Homes Alliance in Scotland, Dr. Matthew Lee, who's a senior policy officer at Citizens Advice Scotland, Scott Sanford, who's a technical services and skills manager at SNPF, and Marcus Shepherd, who is one of Nesta's own, our policy manager for our Sustainable Future mission at Nesta. So to kick us off, this is one of the pre-submitted questions. So thank you in advance to all those who sent in questions. How do we change the narrative on clean heat so that it's seen as an opportunity, not a cost burden? And I'm going to separate this question into two. So to deal with the first part, what is the narrative at the moment and where could it be moved to? And I'm going to start with you, Gillian.
Thanks, Ashley, and thanks for the insight into the forthcoming plan, Robin. Really interesting to set the scene for this discussion. I think very much things are presented through a negative lens at the moment, and it's often considered in terms of how much this transition is going to cost the taxpayer or cost the homeowner. And that's really simplistic and quite inaccurate as a viewpoint, and it misses out some really critical points. The longer we delay, first of all, the longer we delay action on this, the more costly it's going to become, and we run the risk of missing the opportunity of creating new jobs and training opportunities right across the country. So pushing this down the line is false economy and is going to cost us more in the long run. But secondly, we need to start recognising that investing in improving the energy efficiency of our homes and improving and switching to clean heating is an investment in our communities, in our health and well-being, and as well as our homes. Almost every home in Scotland is going to need some work. That's huge, and it will require a significant amount of investment. But this needs to be seen as a long-term programme of work that will deliver warmer, healthier homes, energy security, and support economic growth.
That was a great answer, very eloquent. I'm impressed. Thanks for that, Gillian. Scott, what about yourself? How do you view the narrative now, especially kind of thinking about the kind of workforce question and this kind of scaling ambition?
Yeah, so I think one of the key things that we really need to think about is people they want to be warm. They're in their homes, they want to be warm, they want their bills to be cheap and affordable. And in the current climate with the gas prices, electricity prices, it's very, very high. I think the key thing that we need to really do is educate, and it's right throughout. It's from the workforce right through to the homeowner. There's a lot of negative press, as Gillian quite rightly said, and a lot of it could be down to the installations, it could be down to the cost. But when we educate properly, that's when we see good installations, we hear good feedback, positivity. We're starting to save energy, we're reducing carbon, and hopefully, as Robin said as well, in the future, if we can get the spark gap down, we're not only getting good, efficient central heating systems that are clean, we're going to start reducing bills and improving the, reducing the amount of money that people are paying out,
No, you're all good. Thanks so much for that, Scott. And I think both of you touched on the kind of core aspect that comes up when we start talking about clean heat and the switch away to clean heating systems. And that is, of course, the second part of that earlier question, which is around cost. So let's deal with it head on. Let's dig into it. So Robin, I'm coming back to you here. What are the costs of clean heat at the moment? I know you touched on kind of some installation costs in your presentation there. So what are the costs at the moment, and what needs to change so that it isn't seen as a cost burden?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing to say is that there's a huge amount of variation in the upfront costs of getting a heat pump system. The sort of median amount, so let's keep this sort of number in our head, is somewhere around £12,500, and it's kind of worth understanding sort of where some of that cost comes from. It's a lot of it is kind of, this is the first time that you're changing the way in which your home is heated, so it requires changes to radiators, it requires changes to pipe work. There might be a new power cable that needs to go somewhere else kind of than where it was before, sort of thing. So there's a lot of kind of first time costs here, and the cost for getting your kind of second heat pump, when your first heat pump, if you get that installed in the next couple of years, when that comes to the end of its working life, maybe in the 2040s, it'd be a lot cheaper to get your replacement heat pump. So yeah, I was saying about £12,500 is the upfront cost. In Scotland, £7,500 of that will come from the Home Energy Scotland grant, and you'll be able to cover the remainder from the loan. And then in terms of running costs, your running costs should be lower than you had for a gas boiler. That's particularly the case if it's a kind of even more the case if you've got access to your own electricity generation. Maybe you've already got solar panels on the roof, or if you're able to kind of respond to flexibility things. So there are things called time of use tariffs, which mean that the cost of electricity changes throughout the course of the day. It's not the same through the course of the day, and that means that you can access cheaper electricity, set your system up so it's using that cheap electricity as much as possible, and that will make your running costs even lower, sort of thing. But I guess the elephant in the room, and this is probably where I should hand over to Marcus, is that it's kind of not a natural phenomenon that our electricity prices should be so much higher than our gas prices. That's kind of something that's kind of because of the market that is being created, sort of thing. So there are definitely changes at the government level that could make electricity cheaper.
Yeah, no, 100%. And you've taken some of my sparkle there. I was going to hand over to Marcus next. So yeah, as Robin alluded to, the elephant in the room is the fact that electricity is fundamentally more expensive than gas. So, and this is what's commonly called, and I only learned about this during my time at Nesta, which is called the spark gap, which Scott also mentioned earlier. So yeah, Marcus, over to you. How do we make electricity in Scotland cheaper? What are the quickest routes to that?
Right. Thanks, Ashley. I mean, I think a lot of this is not within the Scottish Government's gift. It's very much a reserve thing, and this is an issue that, you know, DESNZ and the UK government are trying to make progress on, but it's a difficult one because, you know, there's not an easy way to shift the balance of costs without either spending public money or putting up gas bills. So that's a fight that's going on within the UK government at the moment, and I think, you know, Scotland can be an advocate for rebalancing and sort of try and make the case, you know, that this can be done and defray some of the political costs. But I think ultimately Scotland is just going to have to sort of follow the direction there. But I do think there are things, you know, we've seen zonal go away, but a big part of, like, you know, the electricity costs and stuff like that over the next few years, and particularly in somewhere like Scotland with so many remote areas, is going to be distribution costs. So I think, you know, using the powers that are within its gift, you know, within the Scottish government and elsewhere to sort of, you know, expedite planning and facilitate that. I think that's one tangible thing that we could see more on, sort of, you know, more support for the sort of the rapid and cheap deployment of grid infrastructure. And I think the other thing, sort of looping back to the point around cost, is thinking about how the Scottish government can use its power to support people. So while not fully devolved, it has a lot of control over things like, you know, the warm home discount and stuff like that. So using bill support, potentially finding smarter ways to target and you know, support people is definitely a way that, while perhaps not making bills cheaper for all, it can do sort of, you know, targeted support that helps provide relief where it's needed most.
Excellent. Thanks for explaining that, Marcus. And I think that's a helpful segue into the kind of discussion around fuel poverty. We can't talk about the just transition without talking about justice. And we need to make sure that as we transition away, we're not making fuel poverty worse or entrenching it for those already experiencing it. My next question is over to Matthew. Can you contextualize some of the discussion around how people are experiencing energy costs right now and what the current situation is with fuel poverty in Scotland at this moment in time?
The current situation is dire. That's the frank reality of what's going on with fuel poverty in Scotland. So I had a look at some figures from the Citizens Advice Network in Scotland in preparation for today, and they're really quite stark. So this is the most recent data that we've got for the first 3 months of this year. 9,800 people came to a CAB in Scotland to talk about energy issues in the first 3 months of 2025. 4,000 of them came to talk about fuel vouchers. So just let that land. 4,000 people in 3 months came to talk about fuel vouchers. Another 1,200 came to talk about getting discretionary credit for the prepayment meter. Another 1,500 came to talk about energy debt. The demand for energy debt advice has gone up 65% since the pandemic. The situation is effectively just out of control. The average energy debt that people bring to a CAB is £2,500. It's even higher in rural areas. It's over £3,000. The situation is really, really difficult for people out there. It's not getting better. If anything, I would say that for the people who come to CABs and rely on our network for support, it's getting worse. So the reason why Citizens Advice Scotland is interested in this area and supports a just transition is because we want to find ways to make energy cheaper for people, because the current situation is just totally unsustainable. And I think it's really important that we get to ways of making electricity cheaper so that heat pumps do become more attractive. People feel more empowered, more able to do it, that there is a robust grant and loan scheme there so people feel ready to take the plunge, and it's not such a big step for them, so that we can try and start to tackle the really big problem of fuel poverty in Scotland.
Yeah, no, that's a really helpful and stark overview of the context and why it's so important that the right support exists for the right households during this transition. Gillian, it'd be really helpful to hear from you if you can, especially for those who might be listening who maybe aren't as kind of looked into discussions around fuel poverty, but what are some of the schemes that are available in Scotland at the moment, and how are they supporting clean heat as well as alleviating fuel poverty? Like, how are they getting that balance right?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, hearing these figures from Matthew and comparing that to what Robin was saying about the amount of renewable energy we're producing in Scotland, it just highlights that we have to act, and how shameful it is that we're in this situation when we have so much potential to not be. In terms of the fuel poverty programmes that currently exist, we've got Warmer Homes Scotland, which is Scotland's excellent fuel poverty programme, which was set up by the Scottish Government to support households to improve the energy efficiency of their homes and to switch to clean heating. And that, over the recent years, there's been much more emphasis on that switch to clean heat as well as the energy efficiency side of things. Warmer Homes Scotland takes a whole house approach, so it develops bespoke packages for households that are in fuel poverty, taking account of both the needs of the house, but also critically the needs of the household as well, the people living in there. That programme's targeted at homeowners and private tenants, and it can be accessed via the Home Energy Scotland service. They'll check eligibility, and if eligible, they'll then refer people on to Warmworks, which is the managing agent. We've also got in Scotland the area-based schemes, which was a programme that was introduced by the Scottish Government in 2013. And these are projects that are designed and developed by local authorities in partnership with local delivery partners and energy companies. And these are area-based projects, as the name suggests. And they focus on the areas with the highest numbers of households that are in or at risk of fuel poverty. So again, it's a targeted programme, and it's intended to prioritise also the least energy efficient homes in the areas. Now, to date, area-based schemes or ABS have been very much focused on energy efficiency measures, but the intent is there to shift that more towards looking at clean heating as well as energy efficiency. Now, both of these programmes are excellent and the envy of the rest of the UK, but they could and should be doing an awful lot more. They have the potential and the ability to scale up if the financial backing is there. There's other schemes as well, so there's the Social Housing Net Zero Heat Fund, for example, and also ECO. So there are funds available to support fuel poverty, but it's touching the edges really.
That's excellent, Gillian. Thanks for that overview. And I guess I'm going to go a little bit off piece for a second here, and I'm going to quickly flip back to Matthew. So hearing from Gillian, there are lots of schemes available. Matthew, I'm wondering in terms of like what you hear from citizens' advice, and apologies, this is a bit on the spot, so you might hate me for this. I'm wondering what the CAB's perspective is on like awareness of the schemes. Like, do people know that they exist? How do consumers experience that amount of support? Is it clear? Is it straightforward? Or do people struggle to be able to find the right advice and right support for them?
My understanding is that in general terms, if someone came to a CAB to ask about how to get access, grant and loan funding for a heat pump, for example, the signpost would be towards Home Energy Scotland. That would be the answer that a CAB advisor would give. I've actually looked at this issue in terms of how ready is our network for net zero. I think that the honest answer is not as ready as we need to be. And that's because, as I say, there's 4,000 people every 3 months coming in asking about fuel vouchers. If you're a CAB advisor, you don't have time to future-proofing and get ready and think about those type of issues. You're really just dealing with the urgency of now of helping people get back on supply today. That's often the issue that comes up whenever you speak to advisors. They say, well, I'd love to know more about it myself, but I just don't have the time. I've got to focus on the people coming in the door. And so I think charities like Citizens Advice Scotland and our network, we probably do need to get ourselves more ready for what's coming in the future. We know it will come, but we're probably not as far as we need to be yet. But it is something that we are thinking about.
That's excellent. Thanks very much. Moving us on to the next discussion. So we've been chatting a lot here about cost, but of course the next big thing is scale. We know that currently we're delivering about 8,000 heat pumps per year. We need that to jump up to 35,000 per year in 2030, and that's a huge escalation. So I want to ask our panel, can the way we are delivering clean heat at the moment scale up? And I'm going to direct that first to Robin, and then I'm going to come to you, Scott.
I mean, I think the kind of existing model can scale. So the kind of in people individually find the right heat pump for their home, they find an installer on their own, sort of thing. Like that is going to be a good pathway for lots of people. But I think, you know, our kind of sense is that you do also need sort of alternative routes, and you need kind of new business models. You need kind of more role from the public sector potentially, if you're kind of going to offer, kind of get to the big numbers that we need to deliver. So kind of offering that alongside this kind of very much private sector led by the kind of companies in the heating and plumbing system, who have been like the kind of bedrock of delivering the current heating systems into homes. So that could look like kind of collaborations between local government and a heat network provider. So for example, just down in Midlothian, you've got something called Midlothian Energy Limited, which is a collaboration between a heat network company, Vattenfall, and the local authority. But it could also look like, so there's a nice scheme down in Essex in England, where a company is working with a local authority to offer heat pumps to people living in that local authority area, and that kind of offers an easier pathway, offers some scale, hopefully offers some economies of scale to the supply chain as well.
No, that's excellent. Thank you. And Scott, what about from your perspective, especially looking at the workforce, like, can the way we're currently approaching things, can we scale up with this approach?
As Robin said, potentially we can. There's definitely scope for it. Unfortunately, 50% of the workforce is over 55 years old. We're seeing retirements all the time, and we do not have the number of apprentices to cover the number of retirements or people coming into the industry. So I think for me, it's a big ask, and recent figures released by CIFI, so the Chartered Institute for Plumbing and Heating Engineers, are suggesting that we need about 70,000 new plumbers in the UK by 2032. So that includes heating engineers as well. So when you think about how many people we actually need, the number of installations, where we are at the moment, it's a massive ask. The government currently aren't giving enough funding, especially in Scotland, to that transition for the workforce as well. When we go down to England, we've got the heat training grant, which is money that helps towards the upskilling side of things. We don't get that in Scotland. We do have a little bit of funding, which is going to be for the heat pump training van, which is for rural and island areas, which is great. That will help those areas. But I think when we think about Scotland, it's a lot of micro businesses, SMEs. It's a lot of money for them to invest to then upskill the workforce to perhaps not get their first installation, take their business forward. So there needs to be a lot more support. And that's the great thing about the Start at Home project that we've worked on, to get that first installation, to help build that confidence and so on. But I think the government really needs to think about how it funds the apprenticeship in Scotland as well. For almost 9 years, the apprenticeship has not received an increase in funding. So if you think about everything else, inflation, the costs on businesses, national minimum wage, national insurance, everything has went up. It's now become unsustainable for a lot of businesses to take on an apprentice. So we're just going to see that skills gap getting even further apart. So we really do need a lot of support within industry to help upskill and bring new people into the workforce.
That's a really helpful overview. Definitely a good call to action, I think. In terms of kind of also wider issues when it comes to scaling, particularly in Scotland, we have a higher proportion of people living in flats than elsewhere in the UK. So Gillian, I want to ask you about, in terms of the way that we are approaching decarbonisation, how do we do this with flats and tenements and these kind of trickier buildings to decarbonise?
Yeah, it's really important. I mean, about 40% of Scotland's housing stock is tenemented or flats. We talk a lot about heat pumps, but air source heat pumps aren't going to be the answer for everyone. They're not going to be the solution for everyone. And for people in flats, the most appropriate solution is much more likely to be heat networks, as Robin touched on earlier. Now, with 40% of Scotland's housing stock being flatted, there's a real danger here of people in flats being left behind unless we can address some of the challenges in carrying out works to flats. So the sort of in particular the communal works and shared works. There's real challenges in terms of decision making and financing these communal works. The challenge of organising working flats mean that we have a housing stock that's currently in pretty poor condition, a flatted housing stock that's in pretty poor condition. And we need to make sure that these properties are in a reasonable state of repair and maintenance before we start thinking of retrofitting them for net zero and installing clean heating. We are seeing some progress in this. There's a report published a while back by the Scottish Parliament's cross-party working group on tenement maintenance that set out a number of recommendations. We've seen some progress in that the Scottish Law Commission has consulted on introducing compulsory owners associations, and that's something that hopefully we'll see being taken forward over the next few years. But it's a slow-moving project that is incredibly complex. But even if they do come forward, compulsory owners associations, they're going to be meaningless unless we also overcome the barriers of people being able to pay for the work. So we need to see progress on developing and building reserve funds so that people are putting into a collective pot to actually pay for the works, to bring their properties up to a reasonable condition now and to invest in improving them for the future.
That's excellent. Thanks, Gillian. And yeah, I think the trickiness about tenants, that kind of buildings, especially with multiple people living in it, multiple different tenures, it's such a hassle. Anyone who lives in a tenement and has ever tried to do anything to do with bin collection can tell you that it's an absolute logistical nightmare. I'm going to move on to discussing heat networks. So I'm also going to jump to one of the questions that we've been sent in the chat from Amanda Grimm. Thanks so much for sending in your question. So the CCC pathway assumes a high percentage of heat pumps instead of heat networks and other communal heating systems. Why does it assume that? And what is Nesta's position? I'm going to start off with Robin, and then Marcus, if you want to come in as well, go for it.
I think, heat networks have definitely got a role to play in terms of existing buildings, but I think we're also starting from a point where they're not providing much heat yet to in a kind of the retrofit space. So that's partly that they face some of the same challenges in terms of competing electricity and gas prices and so on. I think one of the things that I pick up on is like the kind of can provide cheaper heat, and that's one of the great things with heat networks is that they can take advantage of multiple heat sources. And so if you've got a nice big kind of load of waste heat that is going up in a chimney out into the sky and is not being made use of, that's someone's waste. Well, let's turn that into someone's asset, and a heat network can do that. So if you've got a waste incinerator that's burning lots of rubbish, we can take the heat away from that, put it through a heat network, and deliver that heat into people's homes. But I think the costs of putting pipes under the ground under Scotland's busy roads or in kind of very rural areas, you don't want to be building those pipes really long distances. That's a lot of upfront cost. Whereas a heat pump, that's just one house it needs to be in. And that's so kind of apart from city centres and where that kind of heat network might make sense. I think even blocks of flats that are kind of in more rural areas, you'll just have a kind of one building, one heating solution. So it might be that they're sharing some air source heat pumps, they might be sharing a ground source heat pump, something like that. But kind of heat networks are going to be a city solution, not really a kind of rural solution, I think, in Scotland in the main.
Great, thanks. Marcus, have you got anything to add there?
Yeah, just to add on Amanda's question, just full disclosure, I worked at the CCC at the start of the 7th Carbon Budget in the buildings team, although I left before the really heavy lifting started. The 7th Carbon Budget analysis does have quite a lot of heat networks in it, but they're very much oriented towards the non-res building side. The assumptions that the CCC operated under is basically that while there will be a good number of heat networks in the future, they'll be predominantly based around either sort of industrial areas or sort of large public sector buildings, which might be sort of providing anchor demand for sort of things like large air source heat pumps and stuff like that. So while there will be spillovers to residential areas from those, the core of the heat networks will be in those non-res properties. I think if you drill into the actual data, there are quite a lot of communal systems covered in the res that use heat pumps. That's mainly sort of like retrofitting, I guess, sort of existing systems in tower blocks and stuff like that. There is a bit of a grey area around things like shared ground loops, whether they are classified as heat networks or heat pumps. So I think the point is that there will be heat networks serving homes, but and I agree with the CDCC here. I think our default expectation should be that the heat pump is probably the first port of call for most homes. Reflecting the fact that heat networks are large, complex, capital-intensive schemes that we're not really able to roll out quickly at scale. Nothing like the scale we can do with heat pumps. So yeah, so I wouldn't be too worried or pessimistic about that. I think heat networks will be there, but I think they will come in time, and heat pumps will be the sort of the first and foremost focus.
I just wanted to give a really quick illustration as well. There's the lovely radiator that I've positioned in my shot here, and I'm in a University of Edinburgh building, and so this radiator is being fed by a heat network. But wouldn't it be great if that heat was also being sent out beyond the University of Edinburgh buildings and into some of the houses nearby?
We practice what we preach. You can say that. No, great. That's a really helpful overview of the heat networks discussion. Thanks, all. I'm going to link back quickly to a topic that's come up throughout different people's comments, which is about consumers. So Matthew, I spoke to you earlier about the advice kind of system and whether people are able to access the right advice for them. Gillian, I'm going to come over to you and ask you this question: is what do you think is going to be the best way that the Scottish Government can support consumers to make it easier for them to switch over to clean heating?
Okay, thanks. It is complex for many households. It is going to be complicated switching to clean heating, and often it will include using different trades or appointing different trades to carry out the work. So it is going to be challenging, and we can't underestimate how difficult it will be for some households. For many, they'll be able to just get on with it and do it. They'll find a contractor, they'll appoint someone, and they'll switch quite straightforwardly. But for others, they won't know where to go, they won't know where to start, they won't know what they need to do, and what the best solution is for their property. So there needs to be some kind of support available to people. Now, we do have excellent support through Home Energy Scotland at the moment, but it's not necessarily providing the kind of hand-holding support that a lot of households will need. So the Existing Homes Alliance is doing quite a bit of work just now, looking at what kind of network of support and advice services could be available or should be available to make sure that everyone can access the kind of support that they need. We think that one-stop shops or retrofit agencies could support households and private landlords to understand what they need to do, and where they do want support, help them through the process of planning their projects and managing the work. We're seeing some of these emerging already in Scotland, like Changeworks Eco-Cozy Service, Local Home Retrofit in Glasgow, and Nesta in the northeast of Scotland. But we need people across Scotland to be able to access these services easily, so that people aren't stuck not knowing what to do next or what the right solution is for them. So I think we call for the Scottish Government to be recognising that the role these services have to play in supporting owners to make the right decisions about the home, but also the role they have to play in supporting local supply chains to develop and identify markets and bringing together developing supply chains and potential customers.
Excellent, thank you. And Marcus, over to yourself if you've got anything to add to that. And also, I'm interested in it's such a tricky area when it comes to devolution, because decarbonisation kind of falls over both the reserved and devolved policy. So, Marcus, I'm wondering if you have any views on what the UK government can do to better support consumers here in Scotland too.
I don't think I have that much to add to Gillian's answer. I think a lot of it comes down to just sort of simplifying things, providing a clear sense of direction. I think particularly thinking about the needs of low income and vulnerable households. One of the things I think we're hoping to see in the Warm Homes Plan is a bit more of a coordinated and coherent approach, maybe more of like a local driven approach to things like fuel poverty. I mean, currently we have a profusion of schemes which all basically do the same thing. I think bringing those together and making them a bit more focused would be good, because those are obviously across the whole of Britain.
Can I come in just very quickly on that, Ashley?
Absolutely,
okay?
I was just about to call on you. Go for it.
That's fine. Thank you. I think that what's really important is that we think about different people's circumstances and making sure the journey's right for them. So I'm thinking specifically about people who live in social housing. I think a lot of the time when we talk about this customer journey, we're thinking about relatively well-heeled owner-occupiers. But actually some of the instances that come up when people seek advice from citizens' advice bureaus in Scotland is where a local authority or another social landlord, very well-meaning, has put a heat pump into a block of flats or some sort of clean heat solution to a block of flats or new housing. The the solution gets installed, and that's it. There's no support, there's no backup. I was reading about a case earlier where someone's had a heat pump installed by the local authority, their council tenant. They don't know how to work it. Their bills have rocketed. They're basically in a standoff with a housing officer now. These engineers have been called in and called out saying, oh, we're not quite sure what's wrong with it. But the tenant doesn't know how to solve it because it's not her property and the housing officer isn't really that interested. So that you can kind of see in microcosm all the different problems that could happen with a heat pump or a similar solution. So I think we have to make sure that we're doing things with people rather than to them. Otherwise, you won't get that just bit of a just transition.
No, absolutely. And I think that's, again, it's always a conversation that we have when it comes to clean heating, is ensure that we're doing it right and we're not leaving people behind. So I think a very, very apt reminder. I'm going to move on to, I'm aware we're coming up for time, so I'm going to move on to another audience question. This one is from Sarah Boyack, MSP. Thank you for joining us, Sarah. Do we need a regional growth approach to help get projects over the line with the investment and skills needed? New sources of heat or electricity may not be in a city, for example, but come from a neighbouring council, for example, Edinburgh and East Lothian. And if we have councils involved, will that increase accountability? So I'm going to ask that to Robin.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, and I see that Amanda's posted in the chat a link to a project, sort of a project proposal for a heat network that would span from East Lothian into Edinburgh, or potentially up into kind of bring heat from Mid Lothian down towards parts of East Lothian and Edinburgh. So yeah, like I think one of the really interesting things with the heat transition is it both involves kind of big infrastructure projects, kind of big heat networks that are spanning big areas, but it also involves lots of micro businesses who are kind of the companies that Scott works with, who will be kind of having a business model that is delivering one heat pump into one house sort of thing. So it's kind of, we need kind of vehicles for doing both. And I think there's big roles for local authorities in both sides of those things. So the kind of roles for local authorities, there's definitely a planning sort of role, thinking about different areas. There's definitely a role in kind of enabling heat networks. And then there's kind of supporting the supply chain, understanding kind of, they're often a good kind of trusted person for some people in kind of local areas. That might be kind of a way to point people towards heat pump installers in the local area. But then also, Matthew's made some points around kind of local authorities need to also have the kind of skills and expertise to get it right in terms of supporting people in social housing, both kind of making sure the work is done well and having the kind of tools and mechanisms to check up on that work, make sure it's done well, and the kind of delivery is good too. So yeah, lots of roles for local authorities.
Just to follow up on that, I absolutely agree. Like, the heat transition is going to happen locally, and we need to have a more locally based, locally focused plan. The main problem, as sort of Robin alluded to, is, as a commentator I like put it this week, local authorities over the past century have been transformed from the development corporations that built this country into social care supply bodies with a sideline in bins. And I think that marks the start of the problem. We need this to be done locally. This isn't a project that works with a centralized command and control approach. And I think the government is taking some good steps on it. Building the regional energy system planners, the RESPs, devolving more stuff down through NESA and other bodies to sort of make sure that energy plans are on track. But yes, absolutely, there needs to be a sort of regional growth agenda that looks at both the opportunities to do heat, the capabilities and capacity needed, and sort of, the benefits that flow downstream from things like, reducing fuel poverty, reducing energy bills, and delivering sort of like good work in all the areas of the country.
That's great. Thanks very much, Marcus. Okay, I'm aware that we only got a couple of minutes left, so I want to bring us to our final question. And this one has come from, it just says LinkedIn user, but I think it's a really great wrap-up question. And it points out what is being quite clear throughout today, is that there's definitely an element of everything everywhere all at once. But I want to take us around the panel and ask, what is your thoughts on the critical path? What do you think are the most important enabling factors to reach the pace and scale of change that we want to see? So give us I'm going to go around the panel, and I want to hear your one linchpin that you think will really drive us towards a Scotland where people get clean, sustainable heating that keeps them warm. Robin, I'm going to start with you, and then I'll work my way around the panel.
I should probably start with the big elephant in the room, which is the high cost of electricity. So the UK government needs to make electricity cheaper. The quick route to that is making changes on levies, but there's kind of more systemic long-term things, and that rights this kind of injustice where you can look up on the hill, look out to see renewable electricity being generated, but you can't see it on your energy bill.
I was a bit too slow with the unmute button there, sorry. Scott, over to you. Your one wish.
I was going to say what Robin said, but I think, to be fair, it's great having all these plans, but if we don't have the workforce in place, a suitably qualified workforce in place, then we're not going to deliver. So we have to invest in the workforce.
Marcus?
I think, narrative is, we talked about it at the top, is going to be a big part of it. I think, there are many technical things you need to do, but one of the things that, the governments need to do is tell a better story about how this isn't a scary transition. This is a hopeful thing that, will deliver cheaper bills, greater comfort, greater energy security, growth, all of those things. It is a good thing, and that's a story that needs to be told again and again, because there are no shortage of people who are going to be telling the opposite story, and they are wrong, but they are also very loud.
Gillian?
Yeah, so linking back to some of these points, I think key is the right regulatory framework in order to deliver the skills that we need, in order to set the scene for the narrative and support the narrative by setting out clear targets, clear deadlines. But in particular, we need to have a heat and buildings bill that sets out what homeowners need to do, giving out clear signals on direction of travel and expectations for the next 10 to 20 years, giving certainty to industry. And one of the best ways to give that certainty to industry is through something like the point of purchase trigger that Robin touched on earlier, which sets out a clear pipeline of work for industry so that we know that there's a steady stream of work coming and can scale up gradually to ensure that we've got a sort of manageable and affordable transition.
Fab. And Matthew, last but by certainly no means least, yourself.
I'll give a very Citizens Advice Scotland answer and say the most important thing is to make sure that people have good access to information, rights, advice, and that's before, during, and after their journey from whatever heat source they have now to a decarbonised heat source. I think that's absolutely essential so that you do things with people rather than to them.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much to our wonderful panelists for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. And of course, huge thank you to those of you that are watching, listening, those of you that are listening later on catch up. Please do keep in touch with us over the next while. We know this is going to be a big year for clean heat. So keep in touch with us, follow us on social media, and keep an eye out for the publication of our policy plan for clean heat in Scotland. Thanks very much, folks. Have a good day.